The message came through at 7:14 inches the morning. I had just poured my first cup of coffee. The steam was still rising. My reading glasses were on the counter, and I had to lean in close to see the words clearly. I read them once. Then, again. Then I set the mug down before my hands could shake and spill it. Mom, Marcus and I talked it over, and we think it's best if you don't come to the lake house this summer. He feels like the family dynamic is easier when it's just our unit. You've already handled the booking, which we really appreciate. We'll send you pictures. Love, Claire. Love, Claire. I stood in my kitchen in Savannah, Georgia, in the same house where I raised that girl, in the same kitchen where I taught her how to make cornbread from scratch, where I sat up past midnight helping her with college applications, where I cried alone the night she called to say she was marrying a man I had met exactly twice. I stood in that kitchen and read those words until they stopped looking like language and started looking like something else entirely. A transaction receipt, a polite dismissal, a door quietly closed. I did not reply. I picked up my coffee, walked to the back porch, and sat in the chair my husband Raymond had built for me with his own hands 17 years ago. The wood had grayed beautifully since then. I ran my thumb along the armrest. The morning was already warm the way Georgia mornings are in June, thick and golden and full of birdsong. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started up. Life was going on as normal, indifferent, and steady, the way it does when your heart is breaking quietly inside a body that looks perfectly fine from the outside. I am 64 years old. I am a retired elementary school teacher. I have one daughter, Claire, who is 37, and two grandchildren, a boy named Theo, who is 9, and a girl named Addie, who just turned 7. I have one son-in-law, Marcus, who works in finance, drives a large black truck, and has called me by my first name exactly once since the wedding, then switched to calling me nothing at all. And I had, until that morning, one dream. One singular, shining, expensive dream that I had been building toward for 4 years. Raymond died on a Tuesday in October. It was a heart attack, fast and merciless. He was 61. We had been married for 38 years. The week before he died, he had sat right here on this porch and told me that the one thing he wished we had done was take the whole family somewhere beautiful together. Not a backyard barbecue, not a holiday dinner crowded around a table too small for everyone. Somewhere that required packing a bag and boarding a plane and waking up somewhere that felt like a dream. He had always talked about the Blue Ridge Mountains. He said the air up there smelled like something holy. So after he died, after the grief settled into something I could carry rather than something that carried me, I made a quiet decision. I would do what Raymond couldn't. I would take the whole family to the mountains, to a big rented cabin with wraparound porches and a fire pit and enough bedrooms for everyone. I would make the memory he wanted. I would hold his name at the center of it like a candle. I started setting money aside the month after his funeral. I taught private tutoring sessions after I retired. I sold the truck Raymond had kept in the garage. I cut back on groceries, on clothing, on every small luxury I had once taken for granted. I kept the money in a dedicated vacation account I called, in my own private language, Raymond's Trip. Every deposit was a promise. Every deposit was a conversation I was still having with a man who was no longer there to hear me. 4 years later, the account held $18,400. I had found a cabin in the mountains outside of Asheville, North Carolina. 7 bedrooms, a river view, a hot tub on the deck, a fire pit surrounded by Adirondack chairs. I had spoken to the property manager 3 times on the phone, confirmed the bed sizes, confirmed the wheelchair accessibility for my sister Bet, who had bad knees, confirmed the pet policy because Claire's family had a dog named Biscuit. I had booked it for 10 days in August. I had put all the payment cards under my name, my account, because I was the one who had saved who had planned, who had carried this dream from grief into something real. I had told Claire about the trip 6 months earlier. She had sounded pleased. She had said Marcus was looking forward to it. She had asked me to make sure there was a good Wi-Fi connection because he worked remotely sometimes. I had called the cabin manager again to confirm the internet speed. I had already ordered the custom mugs. White ceramic with black lettering that said, Simmons Family Reunion, Asheville 2026. I had 12 of them wrapped in tissue paper in the hall closet, one for every person I expected to be there, my daughter, my son-in-law, my 2 grandchildren, my sister Bet and her husband Lou, Claire's cousin Angela and her teenage boys, and me. 12 mugs. I was one of the 12. Until a Tuesday morning in June, when I was told, over text message, with a love at the end that felt like a formality, that I was not one of the 12 anymore. I was the woman who handled the booking. I was the travel fund, with legs. I was a line item marked completed. I sat on Raymond's porch for a long time. The birds kept singing. The lawnmower kept running. And slowly, the way clarity tends to come not in a rush but in a tide, something inside me shifted. I thought about how Marcus had stopped making eye contact with me at Christmas. I thought about how Claire had started saying our family in a way that had a clear border around it, a border that did not include me. I thought about Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when I drove 3 hours to be there and was seated at the small folding table in the corner because the dining room, Claire had explained, was a little cramped with everyone. I had eaten my turkey at that folding table and smiled and said it was fine. I thought about how many times I had said things were fine when they were not fine at all. I thought about Raymond, who would have never allowed this. Who would have stood up from that folding table and said quietly, with the kind of dignity he carried in everything, "This isn't how we treat family." But Raymond was gone. And I had spent 2 years making myself smaller so that no one would call me difficult. I went back inside. I refilled my coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened it slowly. I found the vacation account. I found the property manager's email thread. I found the airline booking portal and the car rental reservation. Everything was in my name. Every payment authorization required my approval. Every cancellation right belonged to me alone because I had been the only one who put anything in. I stared at the cancellation button for a long time. I thought about Theo. I thought about Addie. I had been buying them mugs they would never receive. I had imagined Theo fishing in the river. I had imagined Addie running across the cabin porch in her bare feet, laughing at nothing in particular the way 7-year-olds do. I had imagined putting Raymond's photograph on the mantelpiece above the fire and telling the grandchildren stories about the man they only knew from pictures. I closed the laptop without pressing anything. Instead, I opened my phone and sent Claire a single message. I received your text. I need a few days to think. I love you. She replied with a heart emoji. Not words. A heart emoji. I put the phone face down and went to my bedroom closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of Raymond's old sweaters that I still couldn't bring myself to donate, was a shoebox. Inside was a photograph of Raymond and me on our 25th anniversary, standing on the bank of the Chattahoochee River, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. He had his arm around my shoulder and his head thrown back, the way he always laughed, like joy was something he couldn't contain. I held the photograph for a while. Then I put it back carefully, the way you put something back when you know you'll need it again soon. Over the next 4 days, I said nothing to Claire. She did not reach out again, except to text a photo of Addie at swim practice, with a caption that said, "She's getting so good," as if everything was normal, as if she had not uninvited me from the trip I had built out of grief and love and 4 years of sacrifice. She was waiting, I realized, for me to absorb it, to fold it quietly into myself the way I had folded so many things before it. On the 5th day, I got a message from Marcus directly. It was the first time he had ever texted me. The message was brief. Hey, Dorothy. Just checking in on the August account. Let Claire know if you need anything from us. Thanks. Let Claire know if you need anything from us. I read that sentence 4 times. He was not asking if I was all right. He was not acknowledging what had been said. He was checking on the account balance. He was nudging the ATM to make sure it was still operational. I set the phone down. I walked to the window. The crepe myrtle in the front yard was blooming, deep pink, the kind of color that doesn't apologize for itself. Raymond had planted that tree the year Addie was born. He had said every new life deserved something beautiful to mark it. I walked back to the laptop. I opened it. I went to the vacation account. I found the cancellation settings. The property manager had an online portal. There was a button that said, Cancel Reservation. A note below it read, Full refund available if canceled 45 days or more before arrival date. August 2, arrival. Today's date, June 14, 49 days out. Full refund eligible. I did not press it yet. I picked up my phone and I called Claire. It rang 3 times. She answered with a bright, easy, "Hey, Mom," like we were about to discuss a recipe. I said, simply and without any extra words, "Claire, I need you to look me in the eye and tell me why I'm not welcome at the trip I paid for." There was a pause. Then she said Marcus felt the trip would be more relaxed if it was just their immediate unit. She said I sometimes made things a little intense. She said she hoped I understood and that it wasn't personal. Not personal. There it was. The same 2 words, in a different mouth, in a different city, as if they were printed somewhere on a card that ungrateful children hand to the mothers they are dismissing. I said, I understand. I ended the call. I went back to the laptop. I canceled the cabin reservation. I received the confirmation email within the hour. Then I canceled the car rental. Then I called the airline and canceled all 7 sets of tickets. Each refund was processed back to my account because my name was on every single one of them. By end of day, $14,200 had been returned to my account. The remaining balance covered the deposits I had already absorbed myself and considered the cost of a lesson learned late, but not too late. I made no announcement. I sent no message. I turned my phone to silent and placed it on the bookshelf next to Raymond's photograph. The calls came the next morning, 3 days before the July 15 deadline Marcus had mentioned. First, Claire, then Marcus, then Claire again, then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Marcus calling from his office line. Mom, the cabin portal is saying the reservation was canceled. Dorothy, there must be a system error. Can you call the property manager? Mom, please call me back. We have flights already. What happened? I listened to each voicemail once. Then I set the phone back down and went to water my garden. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully. Raymond always said I had the best tomatoes in the county. I stayed outside for a long time, pulling weeds and talking quietly to him the way I had gotten used to doing since he left. The messages escalated through the afternoon. Claire's voice moved from confused to irritated to something that sounded, finally, like panic. Marcus left a voicemail that was more clipped and formal, the way he spoke when he was trying to sound in control. He used words like logistics and resolution. He said they were open to discussing the situation. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say anything about the way they had treated me. He said he was open to discussing the situation, as if I were a vendor who had failed to deliver a product on time. That evening, Claire sent a long text. She said she knew things had been communicated poorly. She said Marcus could be stubborn sometimes and she should have pushed back harder. She said the kids were really looking forward to the mountains and Theo had already told his friends at school. She said she hoped we could find a way to work this out and that if I wanted to, I could come on the trip. But she just needed me to rebook everything before the end of the week. She did not say she was sorry I had been hurt. She said she hoped we could find a way to work this out. And then, she asked me to rebook everything before the end of the week. I sat with that message for a long time. I thought about all the times in my life I had accepted an almost apology because a real one was too much to ask for. I thought about the folding table at Thanksgiving. I thought about the Christmas where Marcus talked over me every time I spoke, and Claire had laughed like it was charming. I thought about Addie's last birthday party where I drove 2 hours and was handed a paper plate and told to sit in the living room while the adults were in the kitchen. I thought about how I had driven home that night and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside. I thought about Raymond saying, "This isn't how we treat family." And I thought about something else he used to say, quieter, when I would come to him hurt and confused, and already halfway toward making excuses for whoever had wounded me. He would take my hand and say, "Dot, stop spending good money after bad. Stop spending good money after bad." I did not rebook the cabin. I did not respond to Claire's message. Instead, I opened a fresh page in the notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer, and I wrote 6 names across the top: Bet, Margaret, Celeste, Ruth, Vivian, June. My sister, who had been a widow for 11 years and hadn't left the state of Georgia in longer than that. Margaret from my old teaching department, who had retired the same year I did and spent most of her evenings alone since her husband moved to a memory care facility. Celeste from church, who had told me last winter that she had never once in her life taken a vacation that was just for her. Ruth, who had raised 3 children by herself and worked double shifts for 20 years, and whose children now lived scattered across the country and called twice a year if she was lucky. Vivian, my neighbor across the street, who had nursed her sister through cancer and then sat empty in her house for months after the funeral, trying to remember who she was without a role to fill. And June, who had given me a ride to the emergency room the night I sprained my wrist, who had sat with me for 4 hours without being asked, who had never once let me thank her properly. I called each of them. The conversations all went the same way, hesitant at first, then stunned, then something I can only describe as a door opening in a room that had been closed for a long time. Bet said, "The mountains? Dorothy, are you serious?" And then she started crying and tried to pretend she wasn't. Margaret said, "I haven't packed a bag for anything but a funeral in 6 years. Celeste said, "Are you sure? You really want me to come?" She asked it 3 times, like she had forgotten she was someone worth inviting. Ruth said nothing for a moment, and then she said, "Lord have mercy." Yes, I found a different cabin, smaller than the first, 5 bedrooms, still in the Blue Ridge, still with a porch that faced the mountains, still with a fire pit and a river view. It was beautiful in a different way, quieter, more intimate, like it had been waiting for exactly the kind of people we were. I booked it in my name. I paid with my money. I did not set up any additional authorized users because I had learned the cost of that kind of trust. I ordered 6 mugs, same white ceramic, same black lettering. But instead of Simmons Family Reunion, I had them printed with something simpler. "You deserve this. One for each of us." The morning we left, I packed Raymond's photograph. I had it in a soft cloth bag nestled between 2 sweaters. I had also packed the lavender candle I had been saving, the one I had bought the year after he died when I thought I was taking the whole family somewhere. I packed it again now for different reasons and for the right ones. We drove up in 2 cars on a Saturday in August. The mountains received us the way mountains do, without ceremony, without performance, just presence. The air was exactly what Raymond had promised, something close to holy, cool and green and full of cedar. When we pulled up to the cabin and the 6 of us stepped out and looked at the view, no one said anything for a moment. We just stood there, all of us women who had given and given and given, and somewhere along the way had forgotten to give anything to ourselves. We stood there and breathed. Bet grabbed my arm and said, Raymond knew what he was talking about. I laughed so hard I had to lean on the car door. That first night we sat on the porch until almost midnight. The stars out there were different from the city, lower, thicker, like they were leaning in to listen. We talked about our husbands, the ones we'd lost and the ones who had left and the one who now didn't always know Bet's name anymore, but still reached for her hand when she walked into the room. We talked about our children, with honesty rather than performance, without the careful editing we all do in polite company. Ruth said her son hadn't called on her birthday in 3 years. Vivian said she sometimes ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the table alone felt too heavy. Celeste said she had started telling people she was fine so many times she had almost convinced herself. Nobody told anybody they were wrong to feel the way they felt. Nobody offered advice that wasn't asked for. We just listened to each other. We held the weight of each other's lives without putting it back down prematurely. On the third day, I set Raymond's photograph on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. I had framed it in simple, dark wood, his head thrown back, laughing at something only he had heard. The river behind him silver in the afternoon light. Everyone greeted him when they saw it, naturally, without prompting. Celeste touched the frame gently and said, "He had a good face." I said he did. I said he had the kind of face that made you feel like the room was safer just because he was in it. That evening we lit a fire. The mountains had gone dark and the sky had come alive, and we sat around the fire pit in the Adirondack chairs, and I brought out the candle. I told them about Raymond's wish, about the trip I had built and the trip I had lost and the trip that had become this instead. I told it plainly, without bitterness, because somewhere in those 3 days something had loosened in me. I wasn't carrying the story as an injury anymore. I was carrying it as information, as clarity. Bet lit the candle. She passed it to Margaret. Each woman held it for a moment, and I asked each of them to say one thing they needed to hear when they were younger. Not advice for anyone else, just something they themselves had needed. Margaret said, "You are not responsible for everyone's comfort." Ruth said, "Asking for what you need is not the same as being selfish." Celeste said, "You are allowed to take up space." Vivian said, "Grief is not something you finish. You just learn to carry it with more grace." June said, "The people who love you will show up. Don't exhaust yourself chasing the ones who don't." Bet held the candle the longest. She looked at the flame for a while before she spoke. Then she said, "You are not invisible. You never were. Some people just choose not to see." When it came to me, I held the candle and looked at Raymond's face through the window, lit by the fire, watching us from the mantelpiece. I said, "You are allowed to protect what you built, even from the people you built it for." I set the candle in the center of the table. We watched it burn for a long time, none of us speaking. All of us, I think, in our own private conversation with something we had been carrying and were finally ready to put down. The email from Claire arrived on the last morning of the trip. I was drinking coffee on the porch, watching the mist lift off the mountains the way it does in the early morning, slow and dramatic, like a curtain being drawn. "Mom, I hope you're doing okay. I know things got complicated this summer. Marcus and I talked, and we both agree that the way things were communicated to you wasn't fair. I think we all need to sit down when you're back in town and have a real conversation. Also, I just wanted to mention, since the cabin got canceled, we ended up having to rebook everything last minute at a much higher rate. I know this is uncomfortable to bring up, but is there any chance the refund from the original booking could help offset some of those costs? We're not expecting the full amount. Just whatever feels reasonable to you. Let me know. Love you, Mom." Just whatever feels reasonable to you. I read the email twice. I put the phone down on the porch railing and looked at the mountains. I thought about 4 years of tutoring strangers' children at night when my knees ached. I thought about selling Raymond's truck, which had been the hardest thing I had done in the year after he died because it still smelled like him. I thought about the custom mugs in my hall closet, the ones that said Simmons Family Reunion, 12 of them wrapped in tissue paper, never opened. I thought about what June had said by the fire the night before. The people who love you will show up. Don't exhaust yourself chasing the ones who don't. I picked the phone back up. I typed a reply. It was short. Claire, I love you very much. That will never change. But the money I saved was mine, and I spent it exactly as it deserved to be spent. I hope your trip was everything you needed. When you're ready to talk, really talk, not negotiate, I'll be here. The door is open, but the checkbook is closed. I pressed send. I put the phone in my pocket. I picked up my coffee. Down on the porch steps, Bet had appeared in her robe and slippers, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, squinting happily at the morning. She said, "Is there more coffee?" I said there was. She sat down in the chair beside me, the way she had been sitting beside me since we were girls in our mother's kitchen. And we watched the mist finish lifting off the mountains. The valley below us was green and broad and patient. The river caught the early light and threw it back in pieces, bright and scattered and impossible to hold. I thought about Raymond, about how he used to say that the best thing you could give someone you loved was the truth about who you were, even when it was inconvenient, even when it cost you something. He had lived by that. He had died still living by it. I had spent too many years fading quietly so that other people could feel more vivid. Too many years arriving early and leaving without being thanked. Too many years making myself into a resource instead of a person. That was finished. Not because I was angry. Not because I had given up on my daughter or stopped loving my grandchildren, whose voices I still heard in my sleep, whose drawings were still on my refrigerator, whose birthdays I would still show up for with both arms full. Love doesn't stop. That's the complicated thing about it. But love doesn't require surrender. And kindness is not the same as erasure. I was 64 years old, sitting in a chair in the Blue Ridge Mountains my late husband had always wanted to see, next to my sister, with 5 women sleeping inside, who had each given everything they had to people who hadn't always given it back. We were tired and grateful, and still standing. We had just been waiting for someone to say, "You deserve to be here," so I had said it myself. I finished my coffee. Bet leaned her head briefly on my shoulder, the way she used to when we were young, and the world was large and uncertain, and we were still figuring out what we were made of. Turns out, we were made of more than any of us knew. If you're listening to this, and you know this feeling, the slow ache of pouring yourself into people who treat your love like a given, like a utility, like something that will simply always be there, no matter what they do, then you belong here. This is Spirit Tales. This is where women who were told to be quiet finally get to speak. Where the ones who gave everything finally get to decide what happens next. Where the forgotten are not forgotten anymore. We tell these stories because they are true. And because the truth, when it's finally spoken, has a way of setting everything free.